Hi, everybody. This is Megan Kemp. Thank you for joining me in part two of gender based violence awareness. This is gender based violence, a unique issue affecting Hispanics or Latinos. I will be referring to Hispanics and Latinos sometimes interchangeably. This is only because the research that I did sometimes use different signifiers to mean the people of Hispanic or, well, Mexican ethnicity or descent in the United States. So sometimes I will say Latino, but depending on where my research showed. But otherwise, I'm going to be referring to the Mexican ethnicity as Hispanic. So, the specific purpose of this speech is to persuade the audience that higher rates of gender based violence in Hispanics are related to problems accessing resources and the lack thereof. The main points are resources through which gender based violence is being combated, how Hispanics are experiencing difficulty in accessing resources to combat gender based violence, and the numbers which show Hispanics experience rates of gender based violence that are disproportionate to other ethnicities, races, and so on. So, some of the resources that help combat gender based violence include education. This means formal education such as literacy, math, science, high school graduating, um, bachelor degree seeking, post-secondary education, everything within that category. The awareness of the issue of gender-based violence, so education on this awareness, such as how to identify gender-based violence, how to get help if you're facing the issue, and assistance for survivors of gender-based violence. Programs such as counseling services, group therapy, shelters, medical services, victim advocates, nonprofit organizations. So any type of resource where a service is being provided to victims of gender-based violence. And legal actions or protections. So that is protective orders, legal definitions, laws, um, law enforcement, hotlines, processes and procedures of reporting as a resource, as a whole, something that allows victims to formally, within society, object and combat the violence that they are experiencing. Which brings us to our next point. Hispanics experience difficulties in accessing resources. So, as far as education, the US Census estimates that Hispanics in Texas have the lowest high school graduation rate of any named race or ethnicity at just 66.36%. The rate for both white and black people, respectively, is over 88% for the rate of high school graduation. Awareness can also at times be affected by culture. This means that as social norms vary, certain issues may not be recognized as such. In communities where rates are higher, gender based violence may prove more difficult to identify due to its potential for more acceptable widespread practice. Programs such as counseling, therapy, medical services are accessed more cautiously by Latinos, if at all, due to the mistrust of authority and medical experts experienced in these communities. And this is due to historical injustices such as the eugenics movement and segregation laws. At times, this can also be due to immigration status. So, accessing resources like going to the hospital and receiving counseling therapy or going to a shelter. Sometimes undocumented immigrants are unlikely to seek this help um, of any authority, even law enforcement, for the fear of being identified as undocumented and the possibility of deportation. Poverty is also an issue in accessing resources. The U.S. Census estimates that Hispanics have the highest rate of poverty for any named race in the state at 20.72%. So the only group that was higher in the rate of poverty was other. So all of the other named and identified ethnicities didn't have quite as high a rate of poverty as Hispanics. Of course, reporting crimes and accessing legal resources proves difficult for similar reasons. So for the lack of education, lack of access to programs because of immigration status and all of that, people don't want to contact the police. People don't want to get an attorney. People don't know their rights, but they also can't find a way to learn their rights. Which brings us to our final point. Hispanics experience higher rates of gender based violence. According to the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics, the percent of violent incidences, excluding simple assault against women where a man was the perpetrator, was 80.9% for the year 2019. The U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics also estimates that just over half of violent victimizations, excluding simple assault, committed against Hispanics are reported to police. So that's just over half that are being reported. And this is something I just want to touch on briefly. As I said earlier, when the community experiences a different culture or has different values and different social norms, sometimes this issue can be difficult to identify. So we're looking at a lower rate of reporting. For whatever reason, people only report just over half of violent victimizations to the authorities. And additionally, how many of those people do not recognize what they're going through as a victimization, as an issue, as gender based violence? So, if you draw back to the first speech that I did, if you watched it, then sometimes certain things are not seen as gender based violence, but they do qualify. These are things that are victimizing people based on their gender or gender identity or perceived gender and gender identity. So the YWCA gender based violence fact page, estimates that approximately 1 in 3 Hispanic or Latina women have experienced physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime, and 1 in 12 of Hispanic or Latina women experienced this particular violence in the previous 12 months. So I just want to touch on that as well. The rates at which it's happening are incredibly frequent, incredibly widespread, and access to these resources, such as awareness and being shown what gender based violence is, I think it would really change the way people saw the issue and the rate at which it would be reported. In conclusion, Hispanics face issues in accessing resources to combat gender based violence. The systemic injustice that impedes the ability to access resources contributes to the disparity that exists in the rates of violence against Hispanics and Latinos. And this concludes the 2-part introduction to awareness of the issue of gender based violence. Thank you.